Good morning. Hope you're well. Hope your travel down has been okay. Usually when I do this, the guys have allowed me to come back for the third time now, so I've done this a lot. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. If you want to take pictures of this, please do, feel free. I'm on social media, James Owen Nutrition at Fuel the Runner as well. If you're on, just get the cheeky follows in. In terms of me, this is my background. So I'm a registered performance nutritionist. So I work across a whole range of sports, including rugby, football. I'm head of nutrition at British Biathlon, and then more recently I've launched Fuel the Runner, which is really a sort of nutrition support program for runners like yourself, just to be a little bit more aware in terms of how nutrition can help enhance your running performance. So for me, as John said at the start, I got a ballot place for London, which should have been when we went into COVID, so mine got deferred to 2 years ago. So I did have I did do it, I did manage it. I picked up a bit of a foot injury, so it was a bit of a limp towards the end, but the biggest thing I'd say for those of you who may be nervous in terms of times, people don't care, your friends, your family, they don't care what time you get. The bit that they're more impressed by is the fact you've got the medal. It's a challenge, but the thing is you've got the crowds. I don't know if anyone's found this in training so far, particularly if you've done any long runs so far. You do sometimes get to that point where you feel like you need to stop, you walk, and it's really hard to start going again. The crowds almost do the opposite effect. If you do stop, you walk, the crowds are just shouting your name, they're pushing you forward, so it's almost making you want to start running again. Top tip, you can't really see it. The biggest mistake I made was not putting my name on the front of my top. So please, I had it on the back. I used to play rugby, as I'm sure some of you do in the room. You used to have it on the back. Biggest tip I can do, put it on the front, whatever you want to be called, within reason. Just put it on the front because people know your name, and that was really sort of a little bit depressive, where you'd be running with people and they go, so-and-so's name, Lucy's name, Chloe's name, Sam's name, whatever it is, and then they just go on RFU. So they did sort of recognise it to an extent. The other thing I would say, and I'll come on to a little bit about this, when it comes to your nutrition, as Karen mentioned, please don't try anything new on race day. Equally, please don't have foods and drinks that you haven't had before. About 16 miles in, the crowds, they can be a really big source of support, but they can be a really big hindrance. And there was a group of guys who had Domino's pizza. There's a Domino's pizza by the cycling course, and they thought it'd be funny to hand it to runners. And I was running with who I assumed were 3 other random guys. They all took a slice of pizza. I'm not sure what pizza it was, I was a bit busy at the time. And about half a mile later, 2 of them were thrown up at the side of the track, or side of the course, and the other one had to divert into the toilet. So all that's going to do is just ruin your race. So please stick to your race day strategy. And equally, you've got sort of I believe it's 99 days today to the race itself. Now you've got so much time to start to practice, develop what your race day strategy looks like, which I'll come on to in a moment. So in terms of today, when it comes to nutrition, I'm sure you've all got lots of questions. I will be around afterwards for any other questions, should anyone have any. What I do as well, if you want to take pictures, by all means, feel free. Please don't feel like you have to write all of this down, because what I will do is send Steph and John a little sort of ebook that basically summarises everything I've said here as well. But in terms of what I'll cover, I'll talk a little bit about things like hydration, a little bit about fueling, a little bit how nutrition can help with your recovery, particularly at the moment as some of those bigger or more intense training weeks come up. A little bit about supplements. So when it comes to supplements, there's huge amounts of supplements that are being promoted. If anyone's on some of these Facebook groups, which professionally speaking have very little, if any, evidence to back up their claims. So I'll share with you a few that can further help and actually support. There's some good evidence. A couple other bits to finish, and then, like I say, if anyone's got any questions, please do let me know. So just a little bit in terms of how nutrition can help. I often say nutrition is just 1% of a runner's development, but it's actually like 1% that can have a huge impact on the other 99%. So I won't go through all of these sort of points in loads of detail, but right at the top, you're fueling. Obviously you're going to do a huge amount of distance. You are using a significant amount of energy over the next sort of couple of weeks, couple of months in the build-up. So making sure you are fueling yourselves effectively is really important. As I mentioned, can make a huge difference in terms of supporting your recovery, impacting things like your training adaptation. So again, you're going out, doing all this mileage, doing all this distance, but if your nutrition's not really there or that strategy is not in place, potentially you're missing out. You're doing all this distance, all these running sessions, like I say, but potentially you're not necessarily seeing any improvement. In terms of some of the other bits, again, particularly at the moment, probably one of the most common challenges that the runners face is injury prevention and illness prevention too. And this is where, if you are underfueling the body, not really getting that nutrition in place, this is where you're more susceptible to coughs, colds, and it's just potentially a week, maybe longer, lost where you're having to take that time off to help you recover. In terms of nutrition, I like an analogy, and the best way I can sort of describe nutrition, if you imagine your body is a bit like putting fuel in your car, a bit like in a Formula 1 car, for example. If you're underfueling, this is where it's going to significantly impact your performance on race day itself. As I say, significantly impact your what you're able to get out of your training. So I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Fail to fuel, prepare to underperform. Again, things like that can make a huge difference. So like I say, it's just going to make the next couple of weeks, couple of months really difficult. One of the things that probably comes as a big shock, a big surprise for a lot of people, as a nutritionist, I'm often seen as the bad person, that bad influence. I'm usually the person that people perceive are going to tell them to say, right, you can't have this, this and this, and essentially it's all the foods and drinks that you enjoy. So most people think I'm going to tell them, you can't have the sports drinks, the sweets, the fruit, the recovery shakes and things like that. But actually when it comes to sports nutrition, it's not so much this case of good food versus bad food, it's more this case of almost context and understanding what's going to be the most appropriate food or drink. So again, if you're snacking on these on like a rest day, at home, watching TV for example, not necessarily the best options. But actually this is where they can make a huge difference, and it's these types of foods that's actually going to help you get the most out of your performance. So things like the sports drinks and the sweets are going to help provide that rapidly digested source of fuel, ready to support your running and your training that you're doing. In terms of recovery, flavoured milk, or as part of that, a cheaper alternative, normal milk or cow's milk if you like. One of the most effective nutrition recovery options. It's got that hit of protein, got that hit of carbohydrate, also has the calcium in to support that bone health, and again it's also going to help with the rehydration. So I'll come back to a bit about milk later on. And the first sort of area I tend to focus on is the hydration side of things. This is probably the thing, or one of the biggest areas that I'd say a lot of, not just runners, but a lot of athletes do overlook. And this is where things like dehydration can start to impact performance both physically, psychologically. It's not just in running, it's in all sports. As well as impacting sort of physical performance, it's also going to impact mental performance, concentration, focus. Again, this is where you're going to see things like that increased onset of the fatigues. It's just going to make it a lot harder for you. So a few things just to bear in mind. When it comes to staying hydrated, when you look at sort of guidelines will say around 2 litres of fluid per day. For you guys, I'd say this is going to be a lot more. So that 2 litres is really just a guideline based on the sort of general population. But for you guys, this is where you're all different in terms of things like sweat rate, for example. The more you start to exercise, if you are training in sort of hot environments, hot conditions, you're going to start to sweat, you're going to lose a huge amount of fluid, as well as things like electrolytes, and this is going to, again, affect that sort of performance as well. Starting to lose huge amounts of electrolytes as well, that's potentially one of the causes where you might start to experience things like the cramping as well. In terms of, as an idea, in terms of how hydrated you are, you can use things like your urine colour. So what we want to aim somewhere near the top, that sort of pale straw colour is a fairly good indicator that you are hydrated. If you are sort of going out for a long run, training, and it's looking towards the bottom end of that scale, those sort of dark yellow, dark orange colours, a fairly good indicator that you're pretty dehydrated there. So certainly worth making sure you're trying to up your fluid intake throughout the day. In terms of the nutrition side of things before a run, so there is this focus, or a lot of people say they like to train fasted, so they like to get up, get out the door, without necessarily having anything to eat. Well, you'll see some people that say training fasted is better for you. In terms of training fasted, there is a little bit of research showing some potential benefits in terms of some of these physiological adaptations, which for time purposes I won't go into right now. When you look at the overall research though, carbohydrate is always king. For fueling your runs or fueling your sessions effectively, this is what's going to help you get the most out of that. In terms of fueling, this really starts around 2 to 3 hours or so, 2 to 4 hours before the start of your exercise. So it just allows the time for the body to digest that meal, whatever you're having, without increasing the risk of things like runner's gut. So runner's gut, for those of you not aware, if you've ever started to do any form of exercise, so going out for your run, maybe you've had a huge bowl of pasta, for example, and then gone straight out. If you're out running and all of a sudden you get that sensation like you need to be sick, you need to go to the toilet, that's essentially runner's gut, and it can be an absolute not a game changer. It can absolutely ruin all your training and your race. So this is by no means a definitive list. What we want here is something fairly high in the carbohydrate, a little bit of protein, just to sort of tide you over. So if you're like me, you like running first thing in the morning, things like porridge with a handful of fruit could be a good option. If you run maybe later on in the day, you could use things like jacket potatoes, pasta dishes are also a good one as well. The one thing I would say with pasta dishes and any of these dishes, try and choose those in a sort of tomato vegetable sauce rather than the sort of cheesy creamy sauces, just because they're a lot higher in that fat and fibre content, and it's going to take longer for them to break down. As you start to run, so depending on how long you're running for, so a lot of runners take the approach, and again, if you're on social media, a lot of them will take the approach of trying to fuel by distance, whereas for me, I tend to go fuel by time, just because people say, or if you see people where they say, oh, I have a gel every 5k, for example. So if you take some of your long runs, as you get towards or further into your run, it's probably going to start to take you longer to complete that distance. And so what you actually find is you tend to underfuel. So a better approach would be trying to aim for sort of time run instead. How much you actually need will vary depending on sort of what your what your running session actually looks like. But these are just a few examples on the screen. So energy gels, some of you may have started to try and experiment with them. I fully appreciate energy gels aren't for everyone, so I've got some alternative examples in a moment. Again, if you prefer to use things like sports drinks, again, you don't have to use things like Lucozade. I'm aware some of these products can get quite costly, so there's lots of sort of homemade options that you can make quite easily, quite cheaply as well. Again, using fruit, using cereal bars can also be good options here as well. In terms of when you need to start taking fuel on during your runs itself, if you're going out for a short run, let's say anything under sort of half hour, 45 minutes or so, providing you've had a suitable meal before the run itself, there's no real need to take on any fuel during the run itself. Once we get sort of an hour and above, this is where it's worth starting to think about some fueling options. So a starting point is around 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That would apply to everyone. 30 grams of carbohydrate, I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. As that running duration or exercise duration starts to increase, so would the recommendations, closer to around 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. There is further research showing that you can have more than this, closer to that sort of 90, 100 grams per hour. The one thing with this, I should say, is that's a huge amount of carbohydrate for the body to digest when it's already in this compromised state. So as you start running, we see this redistribution of blood flow away from the stomach, from these organs, towards the muscles themselves. So you're trying to run whilst trying to process all that carbohydrate. Again, things like that, without doing any sort of gut training, can also increase your risk of runner's gut. So if you are aiming, if anyone's going for some really fast times, if you are trying to get that sort of higher carbohydrate intake, certainly worth incorporating some gut training. If anyone's interested, let me know and we can have a conversation afterwards. For those of you, like I say, probably the most popular option in terms of fueling during the runs itself, it's energy gels. A couple of things on energy gels. They vary across brands in terms of carbohydrate content. So most gels will be somewhere between somewhere around that 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrate per gel. So the SIS ones, for example, they've got about 22 grams. Something like High Five has about 18 grams. Again, for those of you looking to push your performance, some of the, if you've seen things like SIS beta fuel, some of them will have as much as 40 grams of carbohydrates. So again, same thing here, the more you have, the more you've just got to be really careful. So please do use your training runs to practice your race day strategy. If you find that you are really struggling with the gels, you're not finding them, you haven't found a gel that you like in terms of taste, texture, in terms of the quantities maybe not agreeing with you, some alternative to gels could be things like a piece of fruit, such as a banana. Again, this isn't for everyone. I appreciate trying to run whilst chewing on a banana can be a little bit tricky. In terms of other options, as I said, some people prefer to fuel their runs using sort of more of the fluid options. Again, sports drinks, you can buy the powdered fuel options that you mix into your water bottle. The one thing I would say, if it works for you, great, but the one thing I would say from experience, people start taking all these little pouches of Tailwinds and some of these other products with them. When they stop at the water stations on the course itself, they're trying to run whilst trying to sort of pour that mixture into the water, and it just goes everywhere. So they're running with really sticky hands. So that's the only thing I tend to say with some of those powdered options. Again, handful of sweets. I wouldn't necessarily run the entire marathon on just sweets, but a handful of jelly babies, jelly beans, again, would be roughly the equivalent to an energy gel in terms of carbohydrate content. In terms of recovery, this is where you're going to start to see the biggest differences, the biggest improvements over the course of the next few weeks and months. So most athletes, and again, it's not just running, they tend to focus on sort of fueling before. But actually, it's the recovery afterwards. This is where you start to see all that improvement, the training adaptation, the muscles get essentially stronger, so as a result, you get essentially stronger, fitter, faster. When it comes to the recovery side of things, there's what we call the 4 R's of recovery. 3 of them, as you can see, are nutrition-based. The 4th one is more to do with the importance of sleep and trying to prioritise your rest time. The first one is the refuel. So in terms of the body itself, again, if you imagine a bit like the fuel tank, the more you run, the more you drive, the more you use it, the more fuel you're going to use, which needs to be replaced. So trying to start that recovery process as soon as possible after your runs, that's what's going to help. So trying to look for something with some form of carbohydrate in it. Again, post-run, I appreciate you might not have a huge appetite, so something is better than nothing. If it is a couple of sweets, if it is a swig of your sports drink, for example, anything that just provides a little bit of fuel can certainly help. Second R is then the rebuild, so the importance of the protein. So again, getting that protein into the body sooner rather than later is going to support that muscle repair process. So protein options, I have got some examples again on the next slide, but protein options, depending on where you're at, could be things like yogurts, some cereal bars, it could be things like protein shakes if you have got those, depending on the situation that you're in. Top right, the 3rd R, the rehydrate. Again, as I say, during exercise, there's a good chance you're going to be losing quite a lot of fluid without realising. So making sure you are replacing that fluid lost as well is really key. The rest side of things, again, I appreciate everyone's busy. Sleep might not be everyone's, might not be the best option, but this is where actually prioritising your sleep, particularly during those sort of intense. During those sort of intense high training periods, this is again what's going to make a huge difference, both in terms of the recovery process, but it's when you're asleep that it's going to support that recovery process, but it's also going to help with things like maintaining that strong immune system too, so fighting off any sort of viruses and infections as well. Just to put that into perspective in terms of what some of that may look like. So like I say, maybe starting off with some simple snacks just to begin with. If you're out and about somewhere, again, maybe you're not in the position in terms of maybe limited food storage or food access, things like, again, my options are sort of at the bottom, things like the cereal bars and fruit, really easy to keep in the car, your kit bag. If you have maybe pushed yourself a little bit too much, I've definitely done this a couple of times, It might even be worth just keeping a bag of sweets in the car just as that sort of emergency backup. Again, things like wraps and bagels, it's up to you what you put in these, so things like a chicken salad bagel could be a good option that you can sort of snack on as well. I should say you don't have to digest all of this here in one go, even consuming it over 15-20 minutes longer. As I say, the big part here is starting that recovery process sooner rather than later. It's going to make a big difference. Once you're in that position, maybe having a more substantial meal, so same thing here, still focusing on the protein, the carbohydrate, potentially trying to add more vegetables, more fruit, more salad to it, provides additional antioxidants, additional vitamins and minerals to support that recovery process too. Again, what you do is entirely up to you. Pasta dishes, stir fries tend to be my go-to, just because I appreciate we're all busy, we're going from one thing to another, whereas stir fry, chuck in the ingredients that maybe you've got that need to be used up, and it cooks within a fairly short period of time. As I say, just to demonstrate my point of milk. So a couple of years ago, I did the London Landmarks half marathon. I'm a man of what I say. So when I finished, you come through the finish line. I had my family there, and they said, "What do you want to finish?" I said, "Milk." I got on the train drinking a pint of milk. I did get some very strange looks. But like I say, a pint of semi-skim milk, or you could use the flavoured milks instead. It does provide the protein, the carbohydrate, the fluid as well to support that recovery. In terms of supplements to support you, when it comes to food and nutrition, I'd always recommend a sort of food first approach. So everything that you're trying to do, whether it be to manage your fueling, whether it be to support your recovery, you can do through food and nutrition. However, like I say, there are certainly some supplements that can help you. So the first one, caffeine. There is a huge amount of research around caffeine. This is probably the most well-researched supplement out there. So having caffeine around 60 minutes before you run, whether you want to use sort of things like black coffee, for example, or strong coffee, whether you want to use the caffeine gum, the caffeine tablets, you can get some of these little caffeine shots, for example. A lot of people have found the benefits here. Second one is the beetroot juice. If you're on any Facebook groups over the next few weeks, I'm willing to bet you're going to start seeing a lot of posts about this, and people go, "What on earth is it? What on earth is it?" I've heard lots about it, but again, huge amounts of research around the benefits here. So beetroot juice in its concentrated form has been shown to help increase the blood flow and oxygen delivery to the muscles. So essentially you can run longer, faster, at a higher intensity, so it's going to help reduce or improve your time to complete the marathon itself. It's also helping that increased blood flow, helps remove some of those waste products as well, so it can also be used to support the recovery. So there's a company called Beat It Sport, which again you'll certainly come across over the next few weeks and months. Again, it's quite an acquired taste, it's quite strong. I mean, one of those bottles has the equivalent to about 8 whole beets worth of juice in. To get the same effect from food, you'd have to eat about 3 to 4 bags of spinach, kale, about 16 whole beets in one go. So those little shots, they're just a much more manageable way to get enough nitrate into your system to support that recovery process. I've sort of touched on these a little bit already, just in terms of sports drinks and gels. If you haven't done this as of yet, I'd certainly recommend trying a few, see what works for you. A lot of supermarkets now, they will stock things like the Science and Sport ones. When it comes to gels, as well as the carbohydrate content, they do vary quite significantly in terms of taste, texture. The marathon itself, they do, I think it's about 17 miles in, and they provide Lucozade Sport gels. These gels are so sweet, they're actually quite sickly, and I haven't come across anyone at all that's actually really liked these. So again, practice with